Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today's one is going to be about agoraphobia. It's actually quite a common anxiety disorder that many people struggle with. It's something that I've struggled with for a number of years, and actually it took me a long time to be able to overcome it. So I thought I'd just make a quick video on what it is, what the symptoms are, how it's triggered, and how you can overcome it. So let's get on into it. Agoraphobia isn't something that's talked about a lot. You see a lot about general anxiety or social anxiety, but agoraphobia is actually quite common, and it's something that is difficult to deal with. So it falls into one of the 6 categories of anxiety, and the 6 categories are something that, it basically encompasses everything. Right, so you have generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, phobias, panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. So those are that's really it, because generalized anxiety disorder is something that a lot of adults struggle with. Social anxiety disorder is more common in teenagers. Then you have phobias, which trigger anxiety, which is why it kind of becomes an anxiety disorder, because don't forget, anxiety is a response to fear and worry, and obviously a phobia is an intense fear of something. So, what is agoraphobia? One of the biggest misconceptions about agoraphobia is that it's a fear of open spaces, but actually it is a fear of being in a situation where escape is difficult or you can't get help if you need it, right? So it makes sense that open spaces have kind of become associated, because if you're in like a massive field or something, it's difficult to see the end or find somebody, or you might lose signal on your phone. So it makes sense, really. But you might, if you suffer from agoraphobia, you might struggle in situations like exams, lifts, people's houses, public transport, that kind of thing, right? And one of the most tricky things about it is actually overriding that logic. So, in my experience, it kind of became triggered with exams, and it sounds silly because obviously you can see the door, you can get out, but actually you can't, right? You're not allowed. You can't just get up and go. And that seemed to be the first moment that I experienced that intense need to escape. That's kind of why it's a tricky thing to deal with, because logically the majority of situations you can get out of. Public transport, if we're talking trains, for example, you get off at the next stop. But actually, there are situations where you can't get out straight away, right? Like on a plane, once you're on the plane, you're on the plane, and you can't just get out and calm down. And being aware of that, it becomes a very difficult anxiety disorder to overcome, because a lot of anxiety disorders, you kind of talk about reassurance and knowing that nothing bad will happen, but the thing is, when you're trapped, you are actually trapped. So it's about finding the different tools that you can use to cope with feeling trapped, right? So what are the symptoms? The symptoms basically are like every other anxiety disorder. You can get sweaty, you can get shaky, you can feel sick, you can feel dizzy. All of, the similar symptoms. Like, this is one of the things, although there are different categories for anxieties, and there's such a huge spectrum of what triggers anxiety and what anxiety, or the intensity of it, actually, a lot of the physical symptoms are the same, because it is the human body's response to fear. So I won't really go too much into it, because I've got another video on the symptoms of anxiety in general. But basically, it's the same. It's just triggered by certain situations where escape is difficult. So what causes agoraphobia? Now, usually it is triggered by some kind of complication to panic disorder, right? So it can derive from the fact of having a really bad panic attack in a specific situation, and you couldn't really escape the panic attack or the situation, and then agoraphobia kind of stems from that because you realise you're trapped, right? So an example for me was on a plane, and I had had bad anxiety attacks before, but I'd never really had a panic attack as such, or I'd never had it manifest itself in that kind of way. So I was just on the plane, and just suddenly I felt really ill. And then the stewardess started to look at me really funny and was like, oh no, you know, you can't be ill on a plane, you've got people around you. And they were like, go to the bathroom. So I went to the bathroom, but I wasn't actually physically ill. I just didn't, so I began shaking, sweating, hyperventilating. It was awful. And everybody around me started to think that it was a fear of flying. So they were reassuring me, you know, nothing bad happens on a plane. It's okay, we fly all the time. And I was like, that's not my issue. My issue is that I actually can't get out. And what I didn't realise is that for many years before that, I was reassuring myself that I can always get out. You know, and that's something I'll get on later in the video, but I realised that I couldn't get out. And from that moment, it just, something like snapped in me. And I had a real problem with panic attacks after that. And that feeling of being trapped, but almost within yourself, right? Because you can't escape your own body and how you're feeling. So that for me was a really triggering event. And that's kind of what happens for other people too. You know, you have one bad situation. Agoraphobia can also stem from other traumatic events that don't really have to do with panic disorder itself. It could be bereavement, it could be some kind of accident, say, you know, you're in a car accident and the car turns over and you can't get out, or the doors crumple and you can't get out. It can stem from that, and then, you know, following from that situation, you realise, actually, if I get in a car, I might not be able to get out the car, right? So it's different for everybody. It can also be triggered by just a fear of things. You know, you watch the news, you see the bad things that happen, and then your brain starts to go, oh, actually, that might not be so safe. Oh, actually, you might end up stuck there. Oh, actually, this could happen there, that could happen there. So that's an anxiety disorder, but then the agoraphobia bit comes in because you realise you can't get out. So say like you go to a concert or you see bad things happening at concerts, and you know the fear comes from you won't be able to just get out and get away from that venue if you need to. Genetics also have a role to play. If your parents suffer with agoraphobia, it can be passed down to you. It can also be because of the household. So even if it doesn't play a part in your actual genetic code, it can be because you notice what your family is afraid of, right? And this is where I think like arachnophobia comes from, and the big fear of spiders. You see people reacting in a really fearful way, and you're only a child when you see this. So adults will do their best to protect you from that and to not show their fear, but it's usually there. So it can kind of stem from that you observe things as a kid, and if somebody else is afraid of being trapped somewhere, you're likely to take on that fear for yourself. Now, the main part, how do we deal with it? So, the first thing that you want to do is actually have your anxiety toolkit as such, that you have certain coping mechanisms, like breathing and meditation, mindfulness, that kind of thing. Just that's ideally what you want to have. Because if you can calm the response to the fear and the anxiety, you might feel less inclined to escape. Now, that's not something I had to start with, because I didn't realise I had agoraphobia. I didn't realise I was suffering from an anxiety disorder. I just felt like it was just an intense need to get out. So, the first thing I did was walk. Even if you're stuck in a room, walk around the room, because you're effectively tricking your brain into thinking it's getting away, even though you're just walking in circles. But honestly, it worked for me. It could work for you. And it also helps burn off that adrenaline that the anxiety creates. So if you can get outside and go for a walk, do that. If you can't, just walk around inside. Secondly, you also might want to plan some kind of escape route, right? Because it's kind of a controversial piece of advice, because really you shouldn't look for avoidance things, but it's something that helped me in a variety of situations. So if you need help now, just reassure yourself, like if you're stuck in somebody's house, like the door is there, I can get out. If you're in a classroom, try and seat yourself close to the door and be aware, I can get out. And finally, and this is the more long-term one, is make some kind of exposure plan. Now, I'll link the blog post down below. But an exposure plan, basically, you write a list of triggers and you start with the lowest triggering situation. So like if you're not really bothered by lifts, you go in lifts. And you work your way up that list until you're not really anxious in those situations. Then you move on to the next thing. And really, that is the main thing that helped me. But it does take time. Right, just bear that in mind. It won't help you within a week. It might take like 6 months. It might take 2 years. That's the one that you really want to work on. That's the one that will help you in the long run, and for you to be able to actually be in certain situations, like going on a plane. So hopefully you found that helpful. Also, the other things I'd recommend, like little things, is like having a bottle of water with you, having some mints with you, having your phone with you for distractions. Those kinds of things, like little distractions, can actually help a lot, right? Because if you're in a situation and the anxiety is starting to take over, so for me it would be in a classroom. It's just something I always struggle with. If I was in a classroom, I'd start to feel the need to just run away, but I didn't want to run away because I didn't want to miss the lesson, so I'd try and control it and manage it the best I could. So that would mean sipping drinks, having a mint, focusing on the task at hand so that I'm trying to divert my brain away from this need to escape. So it's like, okay, I know the door's right there. That's not what I want to focus on. I want to focus on this piece of work. And once I do this piece of work, then I can get out. I did the same for my theory test, actually, my driving theory test. I was terrified because it was right when things were really bad for me. I was like, being in a quiet room where you have to stay in that room until you're done. It's quite difficult. So I just went in there, I was like, okay, one question at a time. Focus on the one question at a time. The moment I need to leave, I'll go, but look, one question at a time. Go, go, go. The moment I'm done, I can leave. I flew through it, and thankfully I passed it first time. So it is doable to manage it before you get to the exposure plan stuff. So there are ways to cope now. If you found this video helpful, please drop a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments what worked for you, what's your experience with agoraphobia. And please don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.